there's a phone call nobody wants to receive. It's not from the bank. It's not from the doctor. It's not from a worried family member. It's from the auto body shop on a random Tuesday, around 2 in the afternoon, saying that that little dent in the supermarket parking lot is going to cost almost $10,000. And it's precisely at that moment that everything that seemed under control begins to tremble. For those still in the accumulation phase, this bill is a shock. For those who have already retired and live off what they've built their whole lives, this same bill can be the beginning of an imbalance that takes years to correct, if it ever is. What few people realize is that the price tag on the car's display window is never the real risk. It's just the number that appears first, the one that catches your eye, the one that dominates the conversation at the dealership. But there's another number, hidden, silent, that only appears after the contract is signed. The car is in the garage, and life has moved on. That number is the cost of the first serious repair, and it has a cruel ability to appear unannounced at the worst possible moment, when your savings were almost gone, when the trip was almost planned, when the feeling of stability had finally returned. A retiree who buys a car thinking only about the monthly payment or the total price is unknowingly ignoring the most important question of all. What happens when that car crashes? It doesn't have to be a serious accident. A side impact in a tight parking space, a shopping cart collision on a windy day, or a poorly calculated maneuver on a narrow street is enough. The visible damage may seem small, almost insignificant. But what's hidden behind that dented dashboard is where the story starts to get expensive, very expensive. There's a huge difference between making a financial mistake at 30 and making the same mistake at 70. At 30, there's time, there's active income, there's the real possibility of working more, saving differently, adjusting course, and moving forward as if the stumble were just part of the learning process. The loss hurts, but life absorbs it. The body can handle the extra pace, the mind finds a way out, and a few years later the story even becomes a joke at a dinner table. But at 70, that same margin simply no longer exists. And pretending it does is one of the most dangerous mistakes a person can make when choosing their next car. When a retiree chooses the wrong vehicle, the impact isn't just seen in the bank account. It appears in the decisions that follow, in the sacrifices no one announces aloud, but that silently and progressively shape daily life. The doctor's appointment that gets postponed because the money went to the auto body shop. The trip that was supposed to happen in March and is now maybe next year. The dinner out that's no longer a regular event, but an exception. These are small, individual cuts that seem manageable when viewed separately, but together they narrow the space of life in a way that no budget can properly capture. There's also a dimension that goes beyond the financial aspect and rarely enters this conversation. When a car consumes more fuel than it should, when repairs pile up, when maintenance starts to become disproportionately expensive, what begins to erode along with the savings is something much harder to replace: the feeling of control. For someone who has spent decades building independence, making decisions, supporting a family, and managing unforeseen events, depending on rides, waiting for the goodwill of others, or hesitating before taking the car because "I don't know if it's worth the risk," is a type of loss that doesn't appear on any spreadsheet, but weighs heavily every day. There's a detail that car manufacturers never put in their sales brochures, and that salespeople rarely mention during negotiations. Modern cars, especially the more affordable electric ones, are designed to be assembled extremely efficiently in the factory. Lean production lines, parts fitted with millimeter precision, automated processes that reduce manufacturing time and costs. All of this is real, all of this is impressive, and all of this has absolutely nothing to do with what happens when that same car needs to be disassembled in a body shop after an accident. Because assembling efficiently and repairing simply are two completely different objectives, and the industry, more often than not, has chosen only one of them. What's hidden behind a seemingly simple dashboard can include parking sensor arrays, rear-view cameras integrated into the structure, braking assistance modules, blind spot monitoring radars, and metal supports that, when slightly displaced by a low-speed impact, need to be checked, measured, realigned, and in many cases replaced entirely. Each of these components has a specific repair protocol, often required by the manufacturer itself as a condition for maintaining the system's warranty. And each protocol adds hours of labor, hours that show up in the final budget, with a weight that most owners weren't expecting. The numbers that emerge from this process have a particular characteristic. They scale disproportionately in relation to the visible damage. A dent that occupies less than 30 centimeters on the side of the car may seem, to any layperson, like a repair of a few hours and a few $100s. But when the technician opens the structure and finds a slightly twisted rail, a sensor support out of position, and an area that needs to be measured with laser alignment equipment before any part is replaced, the estimate begins to transform into a list that no one was prepared to read. $12,000 for damage that fit in the palm of your hand is not an exaggeration. It is a concrete, documented possibility that happens frequently enough that insurance companies have already changed their risk tables for several affordable EV models. When Tesla engineers began working on the Model 2 architecture, the guiding question wasn't simply, how do we make this car cheaper for the consumer to buy? The question was different, deeper, and far more difficult to answer precisely. How do we make this car cheaper for the consumer to maintain over 10, 12, 15 years of real-world use? This distinction may seem subtle at first glance, but it absolutely changes everything in the end result. A car that's cheap to buy and expensive to maintain is a trap with attractive packaging. A car that balances both sides of this equation is a genuinely different proposition. And that's exactly what the Model 2 project seems to be trying to build. The backbone of this proposal lies in how the chassis was designed. Instead of using dozens of stamped and welded parts in sequence, creating a structure with multiple junction points that can behave unpredictably under impact, Tesla would be adopting large cast sections in high-strength steel, drastically reducing the number of internal joints and connections. Fewer joints mean fewer places where the energy of a collision can disperse unintentionally, compromising areas that should have remained intact. It's simple logic when explained this way, but it requires a level of engineering and investment in casting equipment that most automakers are not yet willing to make for an entry-level vehicle. What makes this approach especially relevant for the type of buyer who most needs a reliable car is the concept of protection zones. The idea is that the structure is designed so that the energy of a low or medium-intensity impact is absorbed and contained in the outer regions of the vehicle, those formed by modular panels and replaceable components, without this energy traveling to the interior of the structure where the most expensive and sensitive elements are located. If a car crashes and the damage is on the outside, the repair is a part replacement. If the damage penetrates the inside, the repair is a structural investigation with the potential to triple the budget before the first part is even ordered. The modularity of the external body is another point that deserves attention, because it represents a change in philosophy that goes beyond engineering. When an external panel can be removed independently, without requiring the technician to disassemble half the structure to reach it, the repair ceases to be a specialized event that can only be done in certain accredited workshops and becomes a procedure that a much larger number of professionals can perform competently. There's a type of destruction that makes no noise. It doesn't happen in a collision. It doesn't appear in a police report. It doesn't generate photos in the family group chat. It works slowly, millimeter by millimeter, under the car, out of sight, in places most owners will never look while the vehicle is still functioning well enough not to raise suspicion. It's corrosion, and it has a patience that no conventional mechanical problem can imitate. It doesn't break the car overnight. It weakens specific points of the structure over years, transforming what was solid metal into something brittle, compromised, incapable of supporting what it should support, until one day the mechanic lifts the car on the ramp and delivers news the owner wasn't expecting. For those who live in regions where winter requires the use of salt on the roads, this process is accelerated in a way that most people underestimate until they feel it in their wallets. The salt that dissolves ice on the asphalt is the same salt that attacks the protective coating of the chassis, finds the microcracks that time has already created, penetrates the metal, and initiates a chemical reaction that doesn't stop on its own. The problem isn't one difficult winter. The problem is 5, 6, 7 consecutive winters acting on a structure that was designed to be cheap to manufacture, not necessarily durable to maintain. Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, upstate New York, the interior of Canada. Anyone who lives in these regions and has owned a car more than 8 years old knows exactly what we're talking about, because they've paid the price to find out. In coastal regions, the chemistry is different, but the result converges on the same point. The saline humidity of the sea air doesn't need winter to work. It acts year-round, more slowly, but equally persistently. The car body may be immaculate on the outside, the engine running without complaint, the dashboard without a single warning light, and yet the chassis may be compromised in areas that only an experienced technician can identify in a careful inspection. Florida, the Texas coast, the California coast. Completely different environments from the icy north, but with the same potential to transform a seemingly healthy car into a series of chained repairs that drain your financial reserves with a regularity that begins to seem intentional. The pattern that repeats itself in these situations has its own logic, which owners only recognize when they're already in the middle of it. First, there's an isolated repair, something that seems minor, a compromised support, a fixing point that needed to be redone. Then comes another, a few months later, in a different area but connected to the same underlying structural deterioration. And then another. Each individual bill seems manageable. $700 here, $900 there, $1,100 the following winter. But when someone takes the list off and adds up everything spent in the last 3 years simply trying to keep the car reliable, the number that appears can completely change the assessment of whether that purchase really made sense. If there's one number capable of turning the purchase of an electric car into one of the worst financial decisions in a retiree's life, that number isn't the price tag, the financing interest rate, or the monthly cost of electricity compared to gasoline. That number is hidden in a budget line that most people only find after a moderate accident, when the mechanic opens the vehicle's structure and discovers that the impact reached the battery module. From that moment on, the conversation changes completely. It's no longer about repair, it's about replacement. And battery replacement in an electric vehicle is a financial category that belongs to a completely different universe from everything that came before in that car's life. The prices circulating in the sector for this type of service are not rumors or exaggerations from internet forums. They are real figures, practiced by specialized workshops and authorized dealerships, which vary according to the model and extent of the damage, but rarely fall below $10,000 and frequently reach $15,000, $18,000, $20,000 or more. To put this number into perspective, imagine that a retiree bought an affordable electric car for $22,000, paid cash, did everything right, and after 2 years of use, a medium-intensity side impact at an intersection compromises the battery casing. The resulting repair estimate can represent between 60 and 90% of the vehicle's original value. At that point, the car technically still exists, but economically, it has ceased to make sense. What makes this situation especially serious for those living on a fixed income is the lack of a simple alternative. In a combustion engine car, a damaged engine can be replaced with a reconditioned one, found in a junkyard, or negotiated with a variety of suppliers who compete with each other and keep the price within a range that, even if high, still allows for a rational decision. With the battery of an electric car, especially in the most recent and structurally integrated models, this flexibility practically doesn't exist. The component is proprietary, the supply is controlled, the replacement process requires specific certification, and the second-hand market for this type of part is still nascent enough not to offer a reliable solution in most situations. There is also a layer of risk that goes beyond the immediate cost of repair and concerns the insurer's behavior in the face of this type of damage. When the repair cost approaches or exceeds a certain percentage of the vehicle's market value, the insurer may simply declare it a total loss, compensate the owner for the depreciated value of the car, and close the case from their point of view. The problem is that the depreciated value of a 2- or 3-year-old vehicle rarely covers what the owner originally paid, especially if the purchase was made without a down payment or with an outstanding loan. The result is a situation where the retiree loses the car, receives insufficient compensation, may still have an outstanding balance to pay off, and needs to restart the entire selection and purchase process at a time of financial and emotional stress that no one was planning to face. There's a question that rarely comes up in technical comparisons of electric vehicles, but it's perhaps the most honest of all. How much of your energy are you willing to spend solving problems the car created? Not electrical energy, human energy. The time on the phone explaining the accident for the 3rd time to a different insurance company representative. The morning lost waiting for the replacement car that never arrived on time. The afternoon rearranged because the part was delayed another week, and the car is still stuck in the repair shop. For someone younger, this is irritating bureaucracy. For a retiree managing medical appointments, family commitments, and a routine that depends on real autonomy to function. Each of these obstacles has a cost that doesn't appear in any budget line, but weighs heavily on daily life. A car that's easier to repair doesn't just save money, it saves decisions. And decisions are a resource that also runs out. When the repair process involves fewer steps, fewer intermediaries, fewer authorizations, and less waiting, the owner spends less time in problem-solving mode and more time living the life the car should be serving. This distinction may seem abstract until someone needs to cancel an important appointment because alternative transportation wasn't available, or needs to ask for help picking up medicine because the car is still at the repair shop waiting for a part that left the warehouse 10 days ago and hasn't arrived yet. In those moments, the simplicity of the repair ceases to be a matter of convenience and becomes a matter of dignity. The independence a retiree builds over decades is layered: financial, physical, logistical, and emotional. And all these layers depend, to varying degrees, on the ability to move freely, to come and go without having to negotiate this possibility with others. A car that works well and, when it has a problem, quickly returns to normal operation is an instrument for maintaining this independence. A car that transforms every unforeseen event into a long and exhausting sequence of calls, waiting, and forced decisions is exactly the opposite. Regardless of how many kilometers of range it offers in its specifications or how modern the digital dashboard inside the cabin is, what the Model 2 represents, if it delivers in practice what the project suggests, is a shift in priorities within a segment that has historically placed the buying experience far above the ownership experience. Most affordable EV launches were designed to impress during test drives, delight at the dealership, and generate excitement on social media on delivery day. What happens in the 3rd year, the 6th year, the 9th year, when the car is no longer new and problems begin to appear more frequently, is rarely part of the official launch narrative. A vehicle designed to be easier to maintain over time, with a corrosion-resistant structure, modular external components, and real protection for the most expensive systems, is answering a different, more mature, and much more relevant question for those who buy a car to last, not to impress.